Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today I'm going to be doing something I've been wanting to do for a while, and that's an actual ranking based on the original USFL. As you can see by the title and the thumbnail and the image on the screen, we're ranking the original 12 USFL coaches. Back in '83 when the league first came about, it had 12 teams with 12 head coaches, naturally. We're going to be ranking all 12 of these guys. Now, a couple of disclaimers is that this is only based on them as a head coach. Anything that is an assistant or coordinator doesn't matter to me. Number two is that it is not just based on the USFL. This is their overall coaching legacy. What they did in college, what they did in the Canadian Football League, the NFL, the USFL, World League of Football, all of that. Now, the three that impact them the most in my rankings are the USFL, NFL, and CFB. And then every other league matters just a bit less due to the fact that the CFL, while being a legit professional football league, is truly kind of its own game, and so is the Arena Football League. And then the other leagues didn't last a ton of time. So without further ado, let's get started with the ranking. Coming in at number 12 is Doug Shively. Doug Shively is the clear favorite to be the bottom of the leaderboard. There is no one else who's even really close to him in terms of ineptitude. The reason being is the fact that Doug only coached 1 year as a head coach, and that was the year with the Wranglers, where he went 4-14, tied for the worst record in the entire league, and his 10-game losing streak to end the season also just happened to be the literal worst in the entire history of the team. So, yeah, let's just say he didn't do that great. Not to mention, the guy was never even a coordinator at any point during his career. It really is kind of weird that they ended up getting the job, but I think it shows that he really wasn't ready for it, as the team was really terrible. Yeah, their next season they weren't really that much better either when they, did their franchise swap. But the fact is that the team just really was not that good under him. And I think that because of that, 4-14 is just such a terrible record. They never coached anywhere else. It's clear that he's the worst of all of these guys, as every other guy that coached that first year either coached somewhere else before or after as a head coach. But Doug, nope, so he gets the bottom of the list. Coming in at number 11 is Dick Curry. He was the head coach of the Breakers for all 3 seasons of the USFL, and their first year as the Boston Breakers, he ended up winning Coach of the Year. He won that because this team ended up going 11-7, but they still missed the playoffs, as they were one of 2 teams that actually had an 11-7 record, yet didn't make the playoffs. But aside from that '83 season, which was a very solid year for him, he didn't actually go 500 again. He went 8-10 in '84, and then he went 6-12 in '85. The first year of him being a head coach in some form of professional football was in the World Football League with the Portland Storm, who he went 7-12-1 with. So, again, not a really solid record there. And in terms of college, he was the Cal State Fullerton head coach for a couple of years, and he finished second in their conference twice. But, overall, it's pretty easy to say why he's 11. He's definitely better than Doug just because of the fact that he actually, coached more than 1 year and that he did have a very solid '83 season. But aside from that, he really didn't do that much anywhere. He was a position coach and a coordinator for a couple years in the NFL. So in terms of his other non-head coaching career is also better than Doug, but Curry definitely is one of the weaker two. And I would say that these two guys are definitely 2 weakest coaches and definitely deserve to not be in the top 10. Coming in number 10 to start the top 10 is going to be the Birmingham Stallions head coach, Rolly Dodge. To put it simply, this guy definitely deserves to be in the top 10. For what he did in the USFL, he was great. The first year they ended up going 9-9. Naturally, that wasn't good enough for the playoffs, but a 500 record is decent, naturally, since that is being mediocre. The next 2 seasons, however, they would end up making the playoffs both seasons, though they would never reach the actual title game, as they would lose in the second round both years. As the first year in '84, he went 14-4, and then he went 13-5 the second year in terms of the playoffs. And in the '85 season, he ended up winning Coach of the Year for the USFL. So overall, really solid time there. And then, aside from that, he was the Northern Michigan coach for a few years, where he compiled an overall solid record of 33-15-1. But he, naturally, because of them being independent and back then and stuff like that, he never appeared in any bowl games, didn't really win anything of note, just winning games. Mainly his 9-1 season back in '67. But his time in the USFL is definitely what helps him get above the last 2 guys. He actually made the playoffs, had an overall solid record going 36-18 during the time in the USFL, and with his college record being also a near 2-1 record as well, or over 2-1 record, he was a very solid coach. It's just that sadly he wasn't really able to actually get as far as he could. That year after 87 with the Vikings, he ended up passing away, and because of that, with his battle of cancer, we don't really know what he could have done. As who knows, maybe he could have ended up becoming a coordinator in the NFL after that, especially with the success he had in Birmingham. But it's a shame that what happened to him at the end. But overall, man, this guy was a great coach in the USFL. It's just that overall, the 9 guys ahead of him, in terms of their careers as head coach, were definitely better than him. Coming in at number 9 is going to be Red Miller of the Denver Gold. Red is, simply put, the first guy on this list that was actually an NFL head coach. And he wasn't a solid head coach as well. His 4 years with the Denver Broncos, he ended up going 12-2, 10-6, 10-6, and 8-8. Aside from that last year, 8-8 and being 4th in the West, he made it to the playoffs all 3 of the other 3 years. And that first year, he ended up winning Coach of the Year in the NFL, and he took the Broncos to the Super Bowl. Though that was back when you really only had to win 1 game as long as you were a top-tier team. They won and lost the Cowboys in the Super Bowl, but he still did make it to the playoffs 3 years, the first 3 years as a coach. As for his time with the Gold is why he can't really be put any higher, as well as the, accomplishments everyone else had. His 1 year with the Denver Gold, he did not have the success he had with the Broncos. He ended up going 4-7 before getting fired during the season, the only coach to be fired during the season. And the team would end up going 7-11. Or, the better way to put it, is that once he got fired, they went 3-4, which is naturally a much better win percentage than 4-7. Especially when you consider that their interim in between Red and their actual new head coach, Craig Morton, went 0-1, so Craig actually went 3-3. Yes, Red Miller was, let's just say, not the best head coach in the USFL, but he did have some solid time with the Broncos. But that year with the Gold ended up being his last year as a coach. Overall, he's a solid guy to get on here. He's in the Denver Broncos Ring of Honor, but he can't really be any higher. He didn't do enough on either stage to really justify being ahead of some of the guys ahead of him. Overall, a solid coach in the NFL for the few years, but no better than 9 on this list. Coming in at number 8 is going to be Chuck Fairbanks from the New Jersey Generals. Now that we're in the top 8, these are the guys that are definitely on a higher tier. As I said, the bottom 2 guys are definitely the worst tier, and then we get a higher tier in 9 and 10. And this is where we also are getting in a higher tier as well. Chuck Fairbanks, in terms of the USFL, that one not so solid. 6-12 record with the Generals, was gone after 1 year. But it's what he did basically everywhere else. The fact is, he was an NFL coach for 6 years, where he overall had multiple winning records. He had 2 seasons with 11 wins, and he ended up making the playoffs twice, though both times they did get bounced in the first round. He is on the New England Patriots All-70s team, which helps that he coached there for 6 years during that time, and he was actually Coach of the Year in 71 back in college. In terms of college with Oklahoma, he was a very, very successful coach there. He ended up winning 3 bowl games, tied in 1, and lost 1, while winning the Big 8, which is like an OG version of the Big 12. He ended up winning that conference 3 times. Very, very solid accomplishment right there. Now, with Colorado, he did not have the same success that he had at Oklahoma, but the fact is he only had 1 year where he really didn't do anything at Oklahoma. That was in 69, where they didn't even go to a bowl game or finish top 2 in their conference, but all the other years he had a very solid time there. Not to mention he was Sporting News Coach of the Year in 76 for the NFL. The first season they went 11-3. Overall, definitely deserving of being number 8. It's just that he doesn't have enough accolades as some of the guys ahead of him, naturally, like everyone else, but definitely a very solid coach. Coming in at number 7 is going to be the head coach of the Michigan Panthers, Jim Stanley. Stanley was the coach of the Panthers for both years of their existence, and that first year was the year they ended up winning the USFL title, making this the first ever guy on the list so far that won a professional football championship as head coach. To put it simply, this is a close one. I'd understand if you have Fairbanks ahead of Stanley, I really do. I feel like that Stanley's accomplishment in winning the USFL title game, and the fact that even though it's not as good, he still had a decent showing back at college. Literally the year after Fairbanks left Oklahoma was the year that Stanley went to Oklahoma State. At State, he ended up winning the conference 1 year in 76, but he did win 2 bowl games, going 2-0 in those bowl games. Very solid overall. I think that the fact is that I'm putting Stanley ahead of him mainly due to the fact that he did win the USFL title game. And I do know this is a close one. I think this is definitely one of the more controversial picks is the fact that I have Stanley above him. As yes, Fairbanks does have overall more accomplishments than Stanley. I think that the fact that Stanley did win the first ever USFL title game is why I'm putting him ahead, though I do understand if you have it the other way around. Coming in at number 6 is going to be Ray Yauch. Yauch is the head coach of the Washington Federals for the 2 years. Now, technically 2, but really 1. He went 4-14 the first season. That was the other guy who tied for the worst record in the entire league. And then the next season, after getting curb stomped in the first week, he got fired. So he only coached 1 game in the second season. His time in the Arena Football League, because he coached there 2 years, also abysmal. 2-4 record and a 4-10 record. Truly terrible. Why is he 6? Well, the CFL, he was pretty good. In terms of the CFL, he ended up winning a single Grey Cup, but he also went to a couple more. So he was a very solid coach as he continuously made the playoffs, both with the Eskimos and the Blue Bombers, as he ended up making the playoffs nearly every single year he was a coach. Even the last 2 years he came in back in the late 90s with the Rough Riders, he ended up making the playoffs one of those 2 years. And he ended up winning a Coach of the Year twice. The Annis Stuckes Award is the Coach of the Year. He won one both with the Eskimos and won one with the Blue Bombers. So he won a Grey Cup with one team, and he ended up winning Coach of the Year with 2 teams. Overall, definitely a very solid coach and deserves to be this high. Like I said, even though the CFL, I view it as, in terms of an overall standpoint, less than, the NFL, USFL, and all that. The fact is, he coached a long time. He coached from 70 all the way to 84 in consecutive years. And then after that, he ended up coaching at 87, and then he coached 3 years later as well. He was an overall solid coach. Yes, he never really got to the NFL and never really did anything in the NFL naturally. But the fact is he coached a long time in the CFL, and he was an overall really, really solid coach during his time in the CFL. He definitely does deserve to be this high on the list, I do say. So congrats to him for making it in the top half. Coming in at number 5, and the last guy in that second tier of coaches, at the bottom tier is the 4th and 3rd, and then the second guys, as I said, is John Ralston. He was the head coach of the Oakland Invaders for 2 years. Overall, man, very solid coach. He deserves the spot. With the Broncos, where he did coach as well, not the best. He never made the playoffs with them, but he did get to coach them for quite a while, for a few years. So I think that says something. And in terms of the 2 years of the Invaders, he only was there to coach a full year once, and then he ended up, not being there the whole year in 84. That's a nice way to put it. His 9-9 record in 83 was enough to win the division to make the playoffs. And then they got beat in the first round, which I don't think that should have shocked anyone. As I told you, there were 2 teams who went 11-7 missed the playoffs. So, yeah, kind of not shocking that he got eliminated. Now, why I see this high is because of his college accomplishments. He was a college football Hall of Famer, won the Skyline twice, won the Pac-8 twice, was a Coach of the Year in 1970, overall went to 4 bowl games, won 2 of them, finished in the top 10 of polls 3 times, and overall did coach a while. He had a lot of seasons where he had milling records, and I definitely think that this is one of the more borderline college football Hall of Famers, especially since he is in for a coach. But he was still very solid, winning 2 Rose Bowls, getting to 4 bowl games, and coaching for quite a while. 59 all the way to 71 is pretty long to be a coach for, and then coming back to San Jose State for a couple of years. Very solid, definitely deserves to be the top 5, so yeah. Coming in at number 4 and starting off what I would say are the top 4 coaches that by themselves are the tier 1 best coaches is Hugh Campbell. Another guy that you might not have heard of. He was the head coach of the Express for literally 1 year. So if you don't know who this guy is, it's because of the fact that he is a CFL guy. Yes, another CFLer. In terms of the Express, however, he ended up going 8-10, didn't make the playoffs, was gone. Why? Because he went to Houston for 2 years where he didn't do that much. So why did he leave LA? Was he fired? Not really. He went to Houston because of the fact of when he was with the Eskimos in Edmonton in the CFL, they went to 6 straight Grey Cups, and they won 5 straight. That was the team with Warren Moon. That's why he ended up going to the Oilers, since the Oilers were getting, Warren Moon. So getting Hugh there kind of helped him get Moon. And overall, man, 5 Grey Cups, that's insane. He's a Canadian Football Hall of Famer. He won Coach of the Year in 79. And he also did win a Northwest Conference in college. So there's that as well. He was the Whitworth Pirates coach for a few years as well. He overall had a couple solid winning seasons, but he did win the conference 1 year. So, like I said, though, the fact that he won 5 straight Grey Cups, the fact that he had basically excellent seasons every year, including one where he went 14-1-1. He definitely deserves to be in this top 4 and one of the best head coaches from the original USFL, or the original group of the original USFL. I mean, 5 Grey Cups, that's incredible. Definitely a very, very, very solid coach. Coming in at number 3 is going to be George Allen of the Chicago Blitz. Now, these top 3 guys are the guys that you know of that whenever you think of USFL old coach, These are three of the guys you probably think off the top of your head. Now, yes, this is going to be the controversial part, and some people are going to say some guys should be higher than the other, but I have George Allen at 3. In terms of his college statistics, the first thing I want to look at, overall, not the best. He did win a conference one year in this SCIAC, but, I mean, a 9-1 record in that conference with Whittier isn't the biggest mark notch in your belt. But overall, he went 53, 38, and 7 during his time in college, so he's a solid college coach. Now we get to what matters, the pro football, because that's what George Allen is remembered for. He is a Pro Football Hall of Famer or NFL Hall of Famer, as he was a 2-time Coach of the Year, winning it once with the Rams and once with the Redskins. Speaking of Redskins, he was put on the 80 greatest Redskins and is in the Ring of Honor for the team. So, overall, a very solid coach in the NFL. Specifically, he completely re-energized that Redskins program, as before he was there, the team had basically been terrible for like the last 15 years, aside from one winning season, I believe. But the one thing that hurts him and why I have him at 3 is the fact that in terms of the playoffs during the NFL, he really wasn't that good. He won 2 playoff games back in 72 to get to the Super Bowl, where they ended up losing to the Dolphins. But aside from that year, he never won a playoff game in the NFL. Now, his 2 years in the USFL, the first year when they were in Chicago, as this is the team that had the franchise swap, as I mentioned earlier, they ended up losing to the Stars in the divisional playoffs. I mean, a lot of people did. And then the second year when they were in Arizona, he ended up losing to the Stars in the title game, as he won 2 playoff games to reach the championship game that year. So he did reach 2 championship games over his pro football career, but he did lose both of them. And those 4 playoff wins coincide against all the years he didn't even win a playoff game. He's a very solid coach. There's a reason he's in the Hall of Fame, but I can't put him any higher than 3 just because of the fact that he didn't have enough postseason success, especially when you compare the 2 guys ahead of him. Coming in at number 2 is going to be the head coach of the Stars in Jim Mora. Now, yes, most people probably just remember him from
playoffs. Don't talk about playoffs. You kidding me?
But the fact is that Mora was an outstanding head coach overall. He may not be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but like I've talked about before, the Pro Football Hall of Fame really is just the NFL Hall of Fame because he should be in it. The fact is, what Mora did was overall incredible. He's a 2-time USFL champion. He was a USFL Coach of the Year. He was an NFL Coach of the Year. He's in the Saints Hall of Fame. Outstanding coach. Now, before we start to all the NFL stuff, let's just start with what he did at Occidental in college. He ended up winning the conference one year, the SCIAC again. He overall went 18-9. He had a winning record every year. Decent, overall solid tenure. Now, in terms of the USFL, he made it to all 3 title games, something that no one else did. And in fact, he was the only coach, well, the only team that made it to the playoffs all 3 years as well. The fact is that his worst year, when he went 10-7-1, they still won the title. The other 2 years, they had 5 losses total. His first 2 years, he had 5 losses in the USFL, and if you include the postseason, 6, which is still less than like Red Miller, who coached 1 year with the gold. Overall, outstanding in the USFL, unarguably. Then you get into what he did in the NFL. In the NFL, as well as outstanding. The Saints were even more of a poverty franchise than the Redskins were before Allen got there. Mora had them have their first ever postseason berth in 87, when they did end up losing to the Vikings. Overall, that's the biggest knock against him. In the NFL, he never won a playoff game. He made it on 6 separate occasions, but he never was able to get over the hump fully. He made it twice with the Colts, and he made it 4 times with the Saints. But even with that, I still put him above Allen. Why? I think the fact that he coached in the NFL as long as he did is better than what Allen did in terms of length. And the fact is that he did win 2 championships in the USFL. And he did create some memorable moments, as you saw before, and the fact that he helped build the dome patrol of the Saints by bringing in Sam Mills and some other guys. He's really responsible for Sam Mills becoming an eventual Hall of Famer because he did bring him to the NFL. Overall, Moore definitely deserves to be second. And in terms of USFL, yeah, he's the best coach ever. But in terms of the best coach to be in the USFL, he comes in at second. Coming in at number 1 as the best coach from the original 12 USFL coaches is Steve Spurrier. Yeah, I put Spurrier at number 1. Some people might say it should be Moore, some should be Allen. I say it's pretty clear it's Spurrier. I think it's overall obvious. Just look at his non-college stats. He ended up with the NFL with the 2 years of the Redskins. He didn't really do anything good. He just kind of was there, didn't do good, was pretty mediocre or bad. But with the Bandits, his team ended up making the playoffs 2 separate years. They didn't win a playoff game, but they still made it twice, especially when they went going 14-4 one year. Overall solid in the USFL. Not awesome, but his win-loss of 35-19 is great, and he was the other guy that went 11-7 and missed the playoffs the first year. Then you get into just his overall, the Orlando Apollos, the last year he ever coached. Yeah, the Orlando Apollos, the AAF. He's technically viewed as, I guess, the champion because his team went 7-1, had the best record by far in the league, and actually since the league shut down, he had the best record. Now, you look at the College Football Hall of Famer and look at just the accolades right there on the left. The guy was a national champion in 96, two-time ACC Coach of the Year, an ACC champion, a 7-time SEC Coach of the Year, a 6-time SEC champion, an East Division champion of the SEC 8 times. That's insane. Now you go look at his stats overall and you see, wow, this guy was great. The fact is that basically ever he was solid. His first head coaching stint at Duke, he ended up still going to a bowl game. He did lose, but he still made it to a bowl game while winning his conference. Then you look at his time with the Gators. The Gators, he did outstanding there as well. He went to bowl games literally every year he was the coach there, aside from his first year. And when you look at him, he won a good amount of them. He also was a national championship winner in 96, as I said, being number 1 in both polls. He finished top 5 multiple years. He finished it top 5 once with South Carolina. He finished 3rd in 01. He finished 4th in 97, 2nd in 95, 5th in 93. The guy was incredible. And even with the Gamecocks at South Carolina, he made the bowl game almost every year there as well, winning a ton of them there as well. The amount of bowl games he's been to, the amount of wins he has, 228 wins with an 89-2 losses and ties. He has won over 2 times the amount of games he's lost. He has been an outstanding college coach, one of the best ever. I think that it's clear and obvious that he is number 1. Not only was he successful in the USFL, not only was he successful in the AAF, but he was also a legend in college. The only knock is really his time with the Redskins. You eliminate that, he was outstanding everywhere he was. And you're talking about 2 years versus all this? I think it's obvious Steve Spurrier is the best coach of the original 12 USFL coaches. So that wraps up my list of ranking the original 12 USFL coaches. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments, if there's anyone you think should have been changed, or if you think there's some guys that you think I over or underrated on here. I think that overall, when you look at the original USFL, you see just how much talent the leagues had back then in 83. Is really, aside from the bottom 2 coaches, the league had 10 really solid coaches with a few that are legitimately like all-time greats. Jim Moore, George Allen, Hugh Campbell, Steve Spurrier. I mean, those top 4 guys are legends for where they did it. And then other guys that weren't legends were still excellent at their job. I mean, you have a 3-time Big 8 winner that I didn't even have in my top 5, let alone my top 6 or 7. He came in at 8th. I think that overall the original USFL's coaching talent was outstanding. Yes, now it has a little bit less of that, but it still is a solid roster, but this original one was something else. If you like this content, want me to notify you about any videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. And if you really do like doing the old USFL rankings, also let me know that in the comments. And as always, have a great night.